Guy de Maupassant, Shali, Admiral de la Valle, seemed to be dozing, but suddenly his aged voice broke the silence. I too had an affair once, a love affair, and a most extraordinary one at that. May I share it? Without changing his position in his deep armchair, with that very Voltairean smile, which had earned him his reputation as an incorrigible skeptic, he began his story. I was 30 years old and serving as a captain lieutenant when I was dispatched to central India to conduct astronomical observations. The English authorities supplied me with everything I needed, and soon I, along with a handful of faithful men, plunged into the heart of that dazzling and mysterious country. To describe the entire journey would take 20 volumes. I beheld unimaginable beauties. I was received by lords of unearthly beauty, living in unimaginable luxury. For 2 months straight, I felt as if I were the hero of an ancient poem, traveling through legendary lands on the back of a magic elephant. In the depths of fantastical forests, I came upon incomparable ruins. In cities that seemed to have stepped from the pages of a dream, I stood in awe before peerless buildings, entirely covered in carvings, delicate as jewelry, airy as lace, and yet immense as mountains. These wondrous creations were so captivating that one could fall in love with them as with a woman, and contemplating their curves, experience an almost physical, sensual delight. In short, I was in a sort of dream state, a waking reverie, as Victor Hugo once put it. Finally, I reached my destination, the city of Gandhara, once flourishing, now fallen into decay. It was ruled by an incredibly wealthy, despotic, frenzied, generous, and ferocious princeling, Rajah, a true Eastern potentate, refined and savage, hospitable and bloodthirsty, femininely charming and mercilessly cruel. The city lay in a valley, by a small lake, girdled by a necklace of pagodas whose walls rose straight from the water. From a distance, it appeared as a mere white smudge, but as one drew nearer, it grew, and the eye began to distinguish the light, soaring roofs of exquisite Hindu structures, domes, spires, pointed arches. About an hour's ride from the city gates, a lavishly caparisoned elephant with an honor guard, sent by the ruler himself, awaited me, and I was escorted to the palace with due ceremony. I intended to change into my dress uniform, but His Highness was impatient to see me. He was eager to make my acquaintance immediately and to determine to what extent I could amuse him. Everything else was a secondary matter. Escorted by soldiers, bronze-like statues in their gleaming uniforms, I was led into a vast hall with galleries, where crowds of people in bright clothes, embroidered with precious stones, stood about. On a sort of bench, backless but covered with a marvelous carpet, sat something resplendent and motionless, like a sun enthroned. It was the Rajah, awaiting me in a magnificent canary-yellow garment. The diamonds adorning his attire were worth, I suppose, 10 to 15 million, and on his brow shone the famous stone, the Star of Delhi, the family jewel of the celebrated Parihar dynasty of Mandor, whose scion my host was. Although this young man of about 25 belonged to the purest Hindu race, at first glance one might have thought there was a drop of Negro blood in his veins. He had wide-set, motionless, veiled eyes, prominent cheekbones, full lips, a curly beard, a low forehead, and dazzlingly white, sharp teeth, which were constantly bared in an involuntary grin. He rose, shook my hand in the English fashion, and seated me next to him on a bench so high that my feet barely touched the floor. It was terribly uncomfortable to sit on. He immediately proposed that we go tiger hunting the next day. Hunting and gladiatorial contests were his passion, and he simply could not understand how one could occupy oneself with anything else. He seemed to sincerely believe that I had traveled such a long distance for the sole purpose of alleviating his boredom and sharing in his pleasures. I needed him greatly, so I began to humor his tastes. My conversation pleased him so much that he wished to show me his fighters immediately and led me deeper into the palace, where there was something like an arena. The Rajah gave an order, and two naked, copper-red men with steel claws on their hands appeared. They instantly hurled themselves at each other, striking with their sharp weapons, which scored long, bleeding stripes on their dark skin. This went on for a long time. The bodies of the opponents were already one continuous wound, yet they still tore at the flesh with the sharp teeth of these peculiar rakes. One had his cheeks slashed to ribbons, the other his ear torn into 3 parts. The Rajah watched the duel with savage delight. He trembled with pleasure, emitted satisfied grunts, unconsciously mimicking the fighter's movements, and kept exclaiming, "Strike, strike!" Finally, one of the opponents fell dead. He was carried off the blood-soaked arena, and the Rajah heaved a deep sigh, regretting that it had all ended so quickly. Then, turning to me, he asked if I had enjoyed the spectacle. I was seething with indignation, but expressed hearty approval, after which he ordered me to be taken to the Kushmahal, the palace of pleasure, where I was to be lodged. Through indescribably beautiful gardens, such as are found only in that country, I reached my residence. The Kushmahal was a genuine pearl. It stood at the very edge of the princely park, and its walls were washed on one side by the sacred waters of Lake Vihara. It is a square building, all 4 facades encircled by a 3-tiered gallery with a divinely adorned colonnade. On each corner, rose-light towers of various sizes and outlines, some single, some paired, some tall, some squat, like living flowers blossoming on the exotic tree of Eastern architecture. And each was crowned with a whimsical roof, reminiscent of a coquettish little hat. At the heart of the structure, a powerful oval dome, like a woman's breast of dazzling white marble uplifted towards the heavens, soars upwards, crowned by an admirably slender, almost ethereal little tower. The palace, inside and out, is entirely covered in carvings, those very same exquisite, intoxicating arabesques, those mute processions of fragile stone figures whose frozen postures and gestures silently tell of times past, of the customs and legends of India. Light filters into the chambers through tall windows that open onto the garden and are crowned with cusped arches. Upon the polished marble floor, wondrous floral compositions are inlaid from onyx, lapis lazuli, and agate. I had scarcely put myself in order when the courtier named Haribadad, assigned to me as a liaison to the Rajah, appeared and respectfully announced a visit from His Highness. In walked the Rajah, radiant as a saffron sun. He shook my hand again and launched in a conversation about this and that, incessantly asking for my opinion, which was unbearably difficult for me to formulate. Then he took it into his head to show me the ruins of an ancient palace and dragged me to the very edge of the park. We found ourselves in a veritable stone forest, teeming with thousands of monkeys. Catching sight of us, the males began scurrying along the walls with horrible grimaces, while the females fled, presenting their bare backsides and clutching their infants to their chests. The Rajah laughed like a madman and, expressing his delight, pinched my shoulder. Then he sat down right in the middle of the ruins, while all around us, a whole horde of beasts with gray side whiskers, perched on their haunches along the walls and clambering onto every projection, stuck out their tongues and shook their hairy fists at us. Having had his fill of the spectacle, the yellow sovereign rose and proceeded with importance on his way, not letting me stray a step, rejoicing that he had managed to show me such curiosities on my very first day, and reminding me that a great tiger hunt in my honor was arranged for the morrow. I went on a hunt once, twice, 3 times, 10 times, 20 times. We hunted every conceivable beast that inhabited those parts: panthers, bears, elephants, antelopes, hippopotamuses, crocodiles, a good half of all the creatures on earth. My strength was spent. I was sickened by the rivers of blood. I was sated with these bloody and monotonous pleasures. Finally, even the Rajah cooled off and, heeding my persistent pleas, granted me a measure of freedom for my work. Now he confined himself to showering me with gifts. He sent me precious stones, luxurious fabrics, and trained animals, and Haribadad, who in his heart deeply despised me, presented these offerings with such obsequiousness as if I were the embodied sun itself. Every day a procession of servants brought me dishes from the prince's table, covered with lids. I was obliged to taste each one. Daily it was incumbent upon me to attend some new spectacle in my honor and to noisily admire the dances of bayadirs, the tricks of magicians, military reviews. In short, everything that the hospitable but insistent Rajah could devise to display the matchless brilliance and charm of his homeland to his guest. When I was left in peace, however briefly, I would either work or go to watch the monkeys, whose company was incomparably dearer to me than that of my host. One evening, returning from a walk to my palace, I met Haribadad at the door. In solemn and ornate phrases, he announced that a gift from the sovereign awaited me in the bedchamber, and he offered apologies on the Rajah's behalf for his earlier lack of perception, which had prevented him from offering me that which I undoubtedly needed. Having delivered his pompous speech, the messenger bowed and withdrew. I entered my rooms and saw 6 little girls, the younger and younger, frozen by the wall. Lined up by height, they resembled little fish strung on a spit. The eldest was probably about 8, the youngest no more than 6. At first, I couldn't fathom the purpose of this infant school, but then it dawned on me. The Rajah was acting from the most delicate of motives. He was giving me a harem. As a mark of special favor, he had chosen the very youngest, for in the East, the fruit is prized the greener it is. Embarrassed, confused, and blushing, I stood before these tiny creatures, who did not take their large, serious eyes off me, as if they already understood what I might desire from them. I was silent, not knowing what to say to them. I was tempted to send them back, but that would have been a mortal insult. A sovereign's gift is not returned. So, only one option remained: to accept and find room for this troop of little ones. The girls didn't stir, looking expectantly into my face, trying to read my thoughts. A curse on this gift of his. What a burden. Finally, feeling that I was becoming ridiculous, I asked the eldest, "What is your name?" "Shali," she replied. This little one was a veritable marvel, a living statuette, her skin smooth and tinged with a hint of yellow, like ivory, her face elongated, with fine and surprisingly regular features. Out of curiosity, I was interested in what she would say, or perhaps wishing to disconcert her, I asked, "Why have you come here?" She answered in a thin, melodious little voice, "To do everything that you command, master." She understood. I asked the same question to the very youngest, and in an even thinner voice, she repeated distinctly. To do everything that you command, master. She was like a tiny mouse, an absolute delight. I scooped her up into my arms and covered her with kisses. The others, apparently thinking my choice was made to leave, but I stopped them, sat down on the floor in the Indian fashion, told them to gather around me, and began to tell them a fairy tale about spirits, for I spoke their language passably well. They listened, holding their breath, shuddering at every frightening detail, trembling with a sweet terror, and clapping their little hands. The poor little ones had completely forgotten why they had been brought. Having finished the fairy tale, I called my faithful servant Lakshman and ordered him to bring sweets, pastries, jam, all of which they ate in such quantities that they could easily have made themselves sick. Then, as the whole affair began to seem rather amusing to me, I decided to entertain my wives and started some games. One of them was a roaring success. I would stretch my legs apart, forming a bridge, and all 6 little ones would run under me. The smallest first, the tallest last, who would invariably bump her head against me. She didn't bend low enough. Everyone laughed merrily, and these cheerful childish voices, echoing under the vaulted ceilings, awakened and animated the palace with their carefree joy. Then, with the keenest involvement, I set about arranging a bedchamber for my innocent concubines. And finally, I settled them there under the care of 4 maidservants, also sent by the Rajah to look after my little sultanas. For a whole week, I played the role of a father to these doll-like creatures with genuine pleasure. We had a wonderful time playing hide-and-seek, blind man's bluff, and tag, and the girls were in a state of perpetual delight. Each day, I taught them some new, captivating game. My apartments now resembled a nursery. My tiny companions, dressed in magnificent silk outfits embroidered with gold and silver, would scamper like nimble little animals through the long galleries and dimly lit halls, where the light, filtering through the filigreed window arches, softly diffused. Then, one evening, I know not how it came to pass, the eldest of them, the one called Shali, who resembled an elegant statuette of old ivory, truly became my wife. Soon this delightful creature, gentle, timid, cheerful, came to love me passionately, and I returned her affection with a strange, shamefaced, hesitant attachment, a mixture of restraint, pangs of conscience, even a certain fear of European justice on the one hand, and sensual tenderness on the other. I spoiled her like a father and caressed her like a husband. I beg the lady's pardon. I fear I am overstepping the bounds of propriety. Her companions continued to frolic around the palace like a litter of kittens. Shali would not leave my side, except for those times when I went to visit the Rajah. We spent unforgettable hours together amidst the ruins of the ancient palace, among the monkeys, who had become quite friendly with us. Shali would lie in my lap, lifting her impenetrable, sphinx-like face to the sky, and ponder something at length, though perhaps I am mistaken and she was thinking of nothing at all, but simply holding this enchantingly beautiful pose, the hieratic pose of sacred statues, immemorially characteristic of her noble and dreamy people. I would bring with me, on a large copper tray, pastries, fruit, and other delicacies. Gradually, the female monkeys with their timid young would edge closer. They would sit around us and, not daring to approach too near, waited patiently for a treat. Finally, the boldest male would approach me with a hand outstretched like a beggar's. I would give him a piece, and he would dash headlong back to his mate. The others, beside themselves with envy and irritation, would raise a deafening clamor, I could only calm them once each had received his share. I grew so fond of the ruins that I even tried to bring my work instruments there. But, catching sight of the shiny brass parts of the measuring devices, the monkeys would scatter with wild shrieks. They must have mistaken these gleaming objects for instruments of torture. Not infrequently, Shali and I spent evenings in one of the outer galleries overhanging Lake Vihara. We would silently admire the bright moon, which, sliding across the firmament, cast a shimmering blanket of silvery light upon the water. And in the distance, on the far shore, a chain of slender pagodas rose like mushrooms growing straight from the waves. Taking the pensive little head of my small beloved in my hands, I would slowly, for a long, long time, kiss her finely shaped brow, her large eyes, as mysterious as this ancient, fabled land itself, her silent lips, which parted to receive the caress. And I would be seized by a vague, irresistible, yet above all poetic feeling. It seemed to me that in this child I possessed her entire mysterious and beautiful race, which had, it appears, given rise to all the other peoples of the earth. Meanwhile, the Rajah persisted and continued to shower me with gifts. One day, he sent an item I could never have expected, and which sent Shali into indescribable raptures. It was a simple cardboard box, rather clumsily covered with shells. In France, one wouldn't give more than 40 sous for it. Here, however, it was a priceless treasure. Undoubtedly, it was the first such specimen in the entire principality. I set it aside and touched it no more, smiling to myself at how they prized such a cheap trifle here. But Shali, not taking her eyes off the trinket, contemplated it with reverence and admiration. Every so often she would ask, "May I touch it?" Having received permission, the girl would slightly open the lid, then with the greatest care close it again and gently run her slender fingers over the array of shells, as if the mere touch of them filled her whole being with inexpressible bliss. In the meantime, I had completed my research, and the time had come for me to leave. I delayed for a long time, held back by my attachment to my little companion. But the decision had to be made. The Rajah, in his sorrow, arranged new animal baitings, new gladiatorial contests. But after amusing myself in this way for another 2 weeks, I declared I could delay no longer, and he let me go. The parting from Shali was heartrending. Clutching me in her embrace, her face buried in my chest, shaking with sobs, she wept uncontrollably. I did not know how to console her. My kisses were of no avail. Suddenly, I was struck by an idea. I got up, fetched the box of shells, and placed it in Shali's hands. "This is for you. It is yours." At first, Shali smiled. Then her face became illuminated by that profound, inner joy which flashes within us when an impossible dream suddenly becomes reality. The girl covered me with kisses in a transport of gratitude. And yet, at the final moment of farewell, she was once again overcome by inconsolable sobs. Having bestowed fatherly kisses and sweets upon my other wives, I departed. 2 years later, the vagaries of naval service once again brought me to Bombay. Due to a confluence of unforeseen circumstances, I was assigned new duties there. It stood to reason I knew the country and the language. I strove to complete my work in the shortest time possible, carved out 3 months of freedom for myself, and decided to visit my friend, the ruler of Gandhara, and incidentally Shali, my dear little wife, who had undoubtedly changed greatly in this time. Rajah Mudan received me with the most unrestrained displays of joy. On his orders, 3 gladiators slew each other before my eyes, and throughout the first day, he did not leave my side for a moment. By evening, I had finally freed myself, sent for Haribadad, and after asking him a multitude of miscellaneous questions for appearance's sake, finally inquired, "And what became of that little child, Shali, whom the Rajah gave me?" The courtier assumed an expression of vexed sorrow, looked down, hesitated, and said, "It is better not to speak of her." "But why? She was such a sweet child." "She strayed from the path, sir." "Who? Shali? What of her? Where is she now?" "I mean to say, she came to a bad end." "A bad end? So she is dead?" "Yes, sir. She committed a wicked deed." I grew alarmed, my heart began to pound, and a feeling of anguish tightened my chest. I asked again, "A wicked deed? What did she do? What happened to her?" Becoming increasingly flustered, Haribadad stammered, "It is better you do not ask." "No, I must know." "She was convicted of theft." "What? Shali? Whom did she rob?" "You, sir." "Me? But how?" "On the day of your departure, she stole from you a casket, a gift from the Rajah. She was caught with it in her hands." "What casket?" "The one made of shells." "But I gave it to her myself." The stunned Hindu raised his eyes to me and explained, "Yes, she did indeed swear by all that is holy that you had made her this gift. But no one believed that you would give a sovereign's present to a slave girl, and the Rajah punished her." "Punished her? What did he do to her?" "She was sewn into a sack, sir, and thrown into the lake, from right here, from the window of this very room where she committed the theft." An unbearable pain pierced me, and I gestured for Haribadad to withdraw, lest he see my tears. I sat all night in the gallery where I had so often held the poor child on my knees. I thought of how there, below me, in the abyss of black waters upon which we had once gazed together, lay a sewn-up canvas sack holding the decomposed remains of her small, once so beautiful body. I left the very next morning, despite the persuasions and the stormily displayed displeasure of the Rajah. And now it seems to me that in all my life I have truly loved only one woman, Shali.